Welcome, everyone. We're going to slowly start, or we're going to start in a minute. So maybe you want to slowly go towards your seat. And maybe I'll just remind everyone that we have a live stream. The camera's there. If you don't want to be, I don't think you're on the camera, but if you don't want to be, if you don't want to be on the live stream, you can just sit on either side, and it won't catch you. And I don't think the live stream. Will you tell us when the live stream sound goes on?
Yeah, everything is on.
Ah, great. Welcome, everyone. My name is Miriam Wistreich. I'm the director of UKS's exhibition space in Oslo, and I'm here with chair of UKS, Stefan Honlykken.
Yes, thank you, and welcome everyone. And welcome to everyone watching on the live stream as well. So this is the first part of our 100-year anniversary celebration at UKS, and this is also the first of a three-part seminar that will run throughout the rest of this year. So UKS, or the Young Artists Society, is turning 100 this year on the 28th of October, and there's this seminar, and there's a book detailing the first 100 years of UKS history, I should say. This is a project that's still very much underway. And then there's an exhibition that opens at Kunstnernes Hus in Oslo on November the 12th. And it will run through to early January. So I hope that every one of you, and as many as possible, get the chance to see that. UKS was founded in 1921 by a group of young artists to further their own artistic careers and to better their living conditions. And it was in the beginning a sort of a social club, which meant that the artists got they organized a space to meet their fellow artists, and just a space to discuss the current topics that was going on. And then, as now, I would say the artists were concerned that they saw a lack of understanding of their work as young artists, and a lack of appreciation, both in terms of the market sales and in terms of press or critics. So that's one of the first topics of concern that they raised, was one of the art critics and criticism that was lacking. Since then, UKS has continued to be a social space for artists, and also an exhibition space and a political organization. And today UKS has about 650 members around Norway, and still it's this main concern of young artists who organize themselves that the most pressing thing for young artists is to find out how can you stay in this system, and how can you become an old artist, as it were. This seminar will start to look at some of the challenges, and look at some ideas on how we can make this system work for more people. And Miriam will get into that in more detail.
Yes, I will just say very briefly a little bit about the motivation for this first seminar. As Stefan said, it's the first of three, and each seminar will focus on a different topic that will lead us, that will lead UKS into its second century. I think if we take away one thing from Corona, we should look at the things we learned about access and the things that became visible about access that perhaps were more invisible before. I think for many of us running institutions, at least we've understood that by streaming things, for example, we can reach audiences who may have been unable to access events that we have had previously. So now that the pandemic hopefully is in recession, at least here we're in our second day of restriction-free living. It's important that we don't forget some of those learnings and think about how we can include even more people in an art world that has a lot of work to do when it comes to parity and access. If we count both mental and physical disability as one, that group of people who may have additional access needs make up 20% of the entire population. That's 1 in 5. And as Stacey Boucher, who we will be hearing from later, has once said, all of us only have able bodies for a little bit of our lives. So there really is no justification for not addressing access needs. And for groups, obviously, who may not come from individual wealth, who live under the threat or reality of racism and sexism, those numbers are much, much higher. And the art sector, what's exciting about the art sector is that it actually has the potential to harbor all of those bodies and people and experiences, but we have a lot to do before we can honestly call our world accessible and inclusive. And that's why we're here today, to start learning with a wonderful lineup or set of speakers. And thanks to you for coming and participating in this conversation, and also for to the people watching from home. I'm just going to say some practical things. Nayara Leite is taking photos. If you don't want to be photographed, you can let Nayara know. The toilets are both downstairs and behind here. They are all gender, and it's marked on the door what kind of toilet it is. We've put in breaks throughout the program, but if you feel the need to stretch your legs or stretch or twitch or do whatever, or just take a break, feel free to do that whenever you want. We've also made a little nap/break room downstairs if you need some time. So you can go downstairs, and there's also an iPad set up so you can still follow the stream without being here if it becomes a bit much, or if you're just tired. There's masks and hand sanitizers around if you still feel like it's nicer to use that. And we just ask everyone to take care of each other and be aware that that coming back into restriction-free life is a little weird. I'm also going to say to the people watching from home that if you go to our YouTube stream, you can have real-time closed captioning. It's a little wonky, but it sort of works. And we have 2 moderators, Johanne and Stephanie, who are behind the scenes moderating the YouTube chat. And we will try to include your questions here in the physical space as much as possible. So please don't hesitate to ask or comment or feel that you can be, or please feel that you can be included in this conversation. And last thing, if you need anything at any time that you can't find yourself, you can just let one of the UKS people know. And I'm just going to ask all the UKS people here to raise a hand. So we're here to help if there's anything you need. And I'll just wish you a very lovely seminar today and tomorrow, and give the word back to Stefan.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to just quickly run through some guidelines for public events that we've developed at UKS, and that we like to restate at the start of public conversations, just to make sure that this debate happens in as inclusive a way as possible, and also that it's a safe space for everyone to participate, both the guests and the speakers. And goes as follows. We want to give each other the benefit of the doubt and assume the best intentions on the part of our fellow speakers, to not assign meanings to others, and to avoid personal attacks. Also avoid what's in English called master domination techniques, or which are maybe better known in Norwegian as hersketeknikker. To listen and acknowledge the personal experience of others, and then to speak with each other and not about other people. And lastly, remember that everyone have the right to define their own group and identity. And I will keep an eye on this on these points to monitor. It sounds a bit too strict, but just to keep an eye on how the conversation proceeds. And if needed, I can call a timeout during the day. And also, if anyone have any concerns or feel the need to talk about anything that's being said, you can also approach me directly around here. So with that, I'll pass on the mic to Eva Rausen, who is here, I think, to welcome us from Bergen, Kjøtt, because we are very happy that that we can be here. Thanks for having us, Eva. Is there a mic here?
One? Yeah. I think they're not in the image. Oh yeah, if you come here.
Yeah, I will. Okay. And now I'm on screen as well, Andreas, but now I've got my back to you. Okay, I'll just,
You can sit on it.
I'll come and join you over here with this long one. Okay, hello everyone watching online and everyone in the room. Thank you so much for joining us at Bergen. I need to say first of all that for those of you who haven't been here before, and those of you watching online who might never have travelled to Bergen or Bergen, we are a production house and music studios. So right now we have Kjøtt, which is a very heavy rock band rehearsing in the studios above us. And so I really apologize if the background drumming gets too much for you. Feel free to ask to increase the volume of the microphone, come closer, take some air. It's not usually like this, but today it's just an unavoidable clash. So I'm sorry if you have that in the back of your head. But also maybe that leads me on to, I just wanted to say a few things at the start of these 2 days, really, because we've been talking about access and institutional access and how we can really think about our organizations and our buildings, and running institutions, those kind of tiny things that we're not always thinking about, like background noise can be very distracting. And yeah, I started out Bergen 18 months ago, just before the corona pandemic started. So now we're opening up, but as Miriam said, I think it's still important to sort of think about what we've learned in those 18 months, how we've learned to care for each other, how we've learned to protect our own physical and mental health, not just of ourselves, but of our staff, of our audiences, of our performers, how to ask for consent when we're getting close to each other, how to think about the settings for our space. So it's very apt timing, this conference, of thinking about how our institutions can be more diversely welcoming in this moment when suddenly everything is open, and we get hit with this phrase now of everything going back to normal, and how it's been so long since we were able to kind of be normal together. And so I think it's time to also question what that normal is, who gets to define it, how do we see it, how do we experience it. And I don't know how many of you noticed, but today you came through the main entrance to Bergen and you all had to go upstairs. And there's no one here who's made themselves aware to me that had difficulty using the stairs. So the last 18 months here in this old margarine and meat factory, which definitely was not built with any non-step-free access in mind, and built with walls where sound travels very easily. I've been really thinking about how we can adapt this building very concretely and non-concretely to be more accessible. And that has really started with mapping out how it's possible to get to this space if you're in a wheelchair. It's very convoluted, but now we have an access guide on the website where anybody coming can find the information they need to be able to get into the building. But when I started, there was a understanding from everybody that was here that Bergen is accessible because we have a ramp at the front of the building, which if you've walked over it is falling apart. I mean, it's questionable if you can call it a ramp. And we had an accessible toilet. There's one toilet downstairs, which is a single cubicle, which is large enough for a wheelchair to be in. So that kind of constituted an accessible building. But actually the door to that accessible toilet was not wide enough for a wheelchair. And you can get through the elevator, but if you come to the front of the building, there's no way of like knowing that that is your access. And there's still a 10 centimeter step you have to get up to be able to get into the elevator. So I kind of share these like tiny investigations I've been doing around the building because I feel like probably all of us, either running institutions or accessing them or attending them, are also kind of faced with these buildings which are not built for welcoming all kinds of bodies. And I really hope that the next few days we can kind of practically also share experience in the breaks of how we're all trying to make these non-welcoming bodies, non-welcoming institutional bodies, more caring and more possible for people to be here. And I think it's also really helpful to share these personal, honest experiences because often that is where the kind of potential for change is. Not so much in like my organizational strategy or our long-term plans, which says that Bergen should be accessible for everyone. Actually, it's in the tiny detail of spending 7,000 kroner to make a wheelchair accessible door on the bathroom downstairs, which we have now. And the dinner table that you'll sit at tonight, the middle one, that's the old door from the accessible toilet that actually isn't accessible. So somehow we can sit around it and, cheers over it. And also that, had to be a budget decision of where we choose to spend our money. Spending it on a door, which after 7,000 kroner, it still looks like a door. I mean, no one notices any difference. But to those people who previously could not come here to use the toilet, that's like a world of difference. And one of the other comments that I faced when I was started here was that Bergen doesn't have any people that come here that are in wheelchairs. Like none of our studio tenants are in wheelchairs. No one that comes to events really uses a wheelchair. So why do we really need to think about access? People using, and I'm using now people who are using wheelchairs as just one example of one group that has one particular access need before I go into talking about many other needs and many other invisible disabilities as well as visible. But that's a kind of, very concrete reaction to that. Actually, there aren't any people using wheelchairs in our building until now because it has never been a space for them. They are not a species, they are people. And I think like the care that perhaps we've all been more aware of the last 18 months is something that we now really need to take forward, not in our long-term plans or in conferences or in books, but in like our budgets, in our websites, in our access guides, in how we think about transforming these buildings and these institutions into more accessible and responsive and spaces that are actually thinking about the multiplicity of care needs that all of us have. So I say thank you very much for bringing this collection of people here to speak and share their concrete and lived and also researched experiences. And I really thank you all for joining here because you're all here with an interest and I hope a desire to also share your knowledge and experiences and ways that you've managed to change these institutions that we're using all the time. Oh yeah, the drumming's still there. I'm sorry. Okay, so now I hand back to you and just say thank you so much. And I just nod. Oh, sorry. I just nod to Andreas, who's doing all the live streaming and the sound today, because without you, nothing would come out of this either. Thank you.
I also forgot to thank people in my opening. Ugh. Okay, I'm just going to say quick thank yous to the entire UKS team who have traveled here and have been so helpful organizing this conference or seminar. Big thank you to Johanne Loke and Stacy Brayfield, who's somewhere in the room, who have been the amazing co-organizers and coordinators of this event. And I also have to thank, I'm sure, Frit Ord Fonden and Nordisk Kulturfond for supporting this seminar. And I think I'll go on to the next segment. So we asked Stacy Boucher, who's a curator at Casco Art Institute working for the Commons, and Mira Thompson, who's a singer and activist, to write us a letter. And on all of your seats, there should be a little letter that they wrote for you. And they also sent it to us in a real envelope. So I'm going to ask, perhaps there's someone in the audience who would be interested to help us read out the letter from Stacy and Mira? And Amata, do you want to come up here? You and Stacy, I think. This mic is clean. I will clean this for you, Stacy.
Thank you.
Der er også et bag her, som du gerne må åbne.
Men det er den...
Ja, og herinde der ligger der også et maskinskrevet brev.
Okay, det er plutselig litt lettere å lese.
So we should choose.
So we should choose who is Stacy and who is Mira. So you can choose.
I would like to be Stacy.
Cool.
Stacy. Have you been rehearsing?
No,
You never read it
No.
either. Okay, good.
No.
We're on the same
we're on the same page.
Ja, kanskje jeg kan gjøre sånn.
Yeah, you can take the microphone off if you like. Shall I read the introduction?
Yes, please.
Monday, 27th of September. Softer Structures and the Social Dimension. Seminar organized by UKS at Bergen in Norway.
We're in front of the large building block where the event takes place. I'm next to Mira, holding an umbrella over her while it drizzles. Her electric wheelchair can't get wet, but it's not just the chair. I like providing her with a bit of shelter. And after all, I invited her to join me to this event, which imbues my sense of responsibility. The sky is a light grey blanket this morning. We're both quiet, putting on and adjusting our face masks and scanning around us, kind of like studying a map. Even though we know the destination, we just need a strategy to get there. It's our first time going to an event together, even though it doesn't feel new. I look at the ramp made of planks, sagging and broken in some spots, and then catch the neon sign of the cow caricature grinning at us. I looked at Mira. Eva said it's safe and sturdy, but just looks old.
That's what everyone says, is my first thought. But I swallow my bitter thinking and know Stacy. They're very precise in making sure our access needs are met. I look at them, wondering how they're feeling right now, and ask, "Are you ready?" Realizing how dramatic that sounds, I add, "To enter." The umbrella Stacy is holding is lowering slowly, making it hard to see the signs outside. Because they're holding the umbrella with their left arm, I offer to hold it. But they reassure me that the pain is manageable. We are silent for a moment, then move towards the entrance at once. A white person sitting behind the desk inside spots us and gets up to open the large doors, smiling wildly.
Hello, I say. We're here for the event with UKS. The attendant welcomes us and let us know it's on the second floor and that the elevator access is behind back. We must be early. For any place we're not so familiar with, it takes planning in order to arrive, well, with fewer snags. We did our research, which usually involves asking for the information we need ahead of time in order to plan. In the foyer, the air is damp, cool, and smells faintly of margarine and meat. A sign in front of us reads, "Be wise, be well," and Mira grins at me, if I may. We do a lot of smiling with our eyes. I spot a sign for the toilets and move that way to scope out the situation. The labels say the amount of toilet stalls, urinals. I appreciate the descriptions for what's behind these doors because gender labels aren't helpful when you just need to know how exactly you can use the toilet. I turn back to Mira. The accessible toilet is on this level. Do you need to use it or would you like to later? I can go with you then too. Just let me know. If she doesn't need to, I already think about how I'll ask her again in 30 minutes. I think for a second if I need to use the toilet or not.
I'm used to postponing my toilet visits and have done so for so long as I can remember. It feels almost strange to go when I need to, but the question makes me realize I actually shouldn't go. I actually should go. I nod, whispering, "Now." And Stacy smoothly opens the door for me, welcoming me in, warmly, like it's their own home. The door is so wide, there's no need for my usual measuring dance, calculating how my wheels are the least likely to cause any damage to the walls. The margarine smell is even stronger here. While looking for the source, I realize the ventilation system must be connected to the main hallway. A natural toilet scent. When the door closes behind us, I feel the familiar tension when someone helps me for the first time using the toilet. I move towards the tip of my seat and ask Stacy if it's possible for them to lift me. Already thinking about how I could lean on them without putting any strain on their left arm.
I feel the flush of adrenaline softening throughout my limbs, and thoughts quickly pass through me about the complexity of need and intimacy, how I'm used to lifting people and Mira is used to being lifted. So it's second nature despite these differences. But I was nervous because I care about Mira. And I know she was hesitant with me because of her problem with my arm. But I assured her jokingly that I'm stronger than I look. It was more like practice, rehearsal, and the grand performance all at once. As we move outside, sentimental, I tell Mira how grateful I am to know her. "Oh, Stacy, my dear," with a knowing voice that lets me know she feels the same way. We move down a driveway towards our second destination, our main grand entrance, and seclude the building to now enter from the back. The wheels of Mira's chair roll over the series of ramps and platforms, and I watch carefully, but I'm also trying to be cool. Moments like these make me feel like the past, present, and future is a continuous arrival. It just depends on where you're at. These sequences are all potential events of care. I think to myself, our entrance is the event of the day. Miriam, Stacy, and Eva are there at the door to greet us. Before we load into the elevator, we discuss how comfortable we feel going all in at once or taking turns.
The elevator is enormous and makes a squeaky sound when ascending, reminding me of these old apartment buildings, elevators that close with a traction gate. Holding my breath, I look at Stacy. Adjusting my mask, tightening it, I ask Stacy again if they feel okay going inside together. From the squinting eyes that are showing above their mask, I conclude that they feel confident enough. I've gotten to know Stacy's eyes, round, shiny, and curious, before I've gotten to know Stacy. We're both experts at smiling with our eyes. When the elevator opens, I quickly scan the room for windows. I count them. 5. Will they open them for the proper ventilation? Will the wind be blowing a little bit? Doing a second room scan, I notice the toilets. Too narrow for my chair. But that's the least of my worries right now. Conscious of every breath I take, I ask Miriam about the windows. Breathing has become a joint experience, aware of the space the people next to me occupy, exhaling, almost dividing the room in little invisible squares before I come in. We can open them, Miriam says, without asking questions. No problem at all. Guests have been entering the room and finding their place. We're all making eyes at each other. Since we're the first presenters of the day, Stacy and I position ourselves at the front of the room, with the camera for the live stream in front of us. A bright light located above our heads, making it hard to see the faces coming in. I look up at the ceiling and observe the interesting choice of installation material, egg crates. Tastes good with margarine, I think. Then I look at the lens and imagine all the people's eyes that look at mine. We invite the seminar guests to find the envelope near their chair and to slowly read it out loud. The letter reads, you can go if you want. Yeah, okay. Should we all read it together? Everyone has the letter. Dear all, recently we wrote and published an essay together exploring the possibility for a social model of disability in the Netherlands and how art and culture creatively, relationally, and materially is leading the way for more accessible futures. The epistolary form invites an intimacy for us to consider, not knowing who we're writing to, but hoping to forge a meaningful connection. We ask the event organizers of UKS for a verbal description of the space that you are currently in, and Eva Rausen shared a detailed recording with us. In response, we fantasized about going to attend this event with you. We also recommend that Bergen Kjøtt make an edited version of the verbal description available, audio and text, on their website for increased access. We thought to say we wish we could be there with you, but we already are. So thank you for your attention and presence. Thank you to the organizers for this invitation. Love,
Love,
Mira
Mira
and
and
Stacy.
Stacy.
Thanks. We take that one. Can we go?
Thank you, Annemate and Stacy, for reading this letter from Mira Thompson and Stacy Boucher. We have about 10-15 minutes before we have a break. So I'll not say so much about the letter, really. We have thought of it as a sort of framework for the coming 2 days, and you're of course welcome to take your copy home. We'll revisit the letter tomorrow. And perhaps I should open the floor already and ask if there are any questions or comments. If there are no questions or comments, then I think we'll just take a prolonged break. So there'll be a break until 10 minutes past 3. The bar has coffee, tea, water, cake, fruit, nuts, lots of things. And we'll be back at 10 past 3. Welcome back to the live stream and to everyone who had a little break. I'm just going to very quickly introduce Jussi Koitila, who is here with us from Helsinki, where he is head of programming at Frame Finland. And Jussi will talk about Rehearsing Hospitalities, the program you've been running for the past 3 years. And we also have Birgit Bundesen and Anna Rieder, who have come from Copenhagen, and who are here to talk about their Center for Art and Mental Health. Birgit is the chair, and Anna is the deputy chair and house poet of the Association of Art and Mental Health. Thanks so much for coming. And we're going to start with Birgit and Anna.
Thank you so much for inviting us. We actually brought an artwork, a collective artwork that's hanging over there, and you back home can't see it. But it's a piece that we did together in the center, where we, from the 1st of September, thanks to a generous funding, established the center, and we've been able to hire some people full time. One of them is our house poet, Anna. We're based in a mental health care institution in Copenhagen, in an old nunnery, actually, where the outpatient clinics of Mental Health Care Center Amager is situated, where we have 4 old
Warts?
wards, yeah, so that they look very institutionalized, because it used to be a hospital. And we've so like the headline for this talk is renegotiating the hospital as a place for that's hospital towards the strange. And with that, we go back to the etymological root of the word hospital, that comes from the Latin hospice, but also from the Greek word xenos. And in the ancient Greek, xenos was like a cultural code where one, as a citizen, was obliged to be hospitable towards strangers. It was a very strict code and was considered a sin to break the code, which was actually the start of the Trojan War, where somebody stole someone else's wife, and then hell broke loose. But it showed that it was considered like a sin to break this rule. And it came from times where people would wander from place to place. So being a wanderer or having to move from A to C, these institutions arose, housing possibilities where you as a host were obliged to offer your hospitality to people or strangers who passed by, and there was like a strict coding that the guest should not try to be should not stand in the way, try to be helpful. So there was like this cultural coding of the host and the guest, which also lies in the root, because xenos means host and guest at the same time. So this ambiguity is like layered in the root of the word. So later in the Latin word of hospice, these institutions would continue to arise up through the big roads in Europe, where people would wander. And it's also the same word that we use for like hospitality, but also hotel or hospices. And first later in the Middle Ages, it became a place where all the ill people were collected, and where this idea also arose that you could cure somebody. So that's kind of like the birth of the modern clinic as we know today, that has become a place of healing, but also with a dominance of a very reductionist biomedical discourse. So working in psychiatry, the first psychiatric asylums arising in Europe, which was like Bedlam in London and Salpêtrière in Paris, were some of the first institutions that kind of collected all the not wanted or all the strange outside the city walls. typically they are placed, the first ones in Denmark, also Sankt Hans Hospital and Risgaard, they are placed outside the city walls and have the shape of small communities or small towns with their own churches and stables, and where people would also help, all the patients would also help to take care of the kitchens and going into the fields. Actually, Sankt Hans in Copenhagen or in Roskilde has its own electricity power station. So if all the electricity goes down inside the city, they can still produce their own electricity. But they were like a combination of taking responsibility for the unwanted or the so-called strangers. At that time, that was a very diverse crowd, heterogenic crowd of what we know today as epileptic illnesses, neurological diseases, the unwanted, people who were criminal, people who were homeless. Actually, at Salpêtrière, if you, as a husband, had a wife who was misbehaving, then you could go and put her at the Salpêtrière. So this whole crowd of the alien towards the identical or the norm, were like the first mental institutions in Europe, and the first psychiatrists were actually called alienists, like the ones who were to take care of this crowd of alien people. And back then there were no really cures or no really efficient treatment for mental illnesses. Some of them who were collected there later, we found out that were identified neurological diseases like epilepsy or the syphilis bacteria that also in its third stage produces psychotic symptoms. So this search for a biological agent is still going on and hasn't had much success. But of course, the invention of psychotropics, where you could kind of dampen some symptoms, was a big revolution. But back then, the cure for mental distress was being close to nature, living a proper, regular life, and hygienic measures where you kind of learn people how to take showers and pray to God, basically. So this idea of like a society collecting all the alien under the same roof is then an interpretation of the original meaning of the word hospitality, and we in the association discuss this a lot about how to open places of care and how we via art, we run art workshops with professional artists that we invite in and make workshops for people in psychiatry users that we've been doing for the last 3 years. So how can we open up in the institution these spaces of repair and care? And we also discuss a lot how to change the world. Basically, we try to start conversations about how to dream a completely new psychiatry, and if we were allowed to do so, what would we do? And one way is to make a revolution and burn the whole thing down and start all over again. But another approach is what we have named tenderness activism, which is a different way we think of producing change by dialogue and by kindness. So this piece of work we have done here is with this group of psychiatry users, where everybody has produced some sentences that we have sewed on this carpet that's going to be hanging on our wall in the center.
Yes.
How am I on time? A little over halfway.
Okay.
Okay. So I still have like 10 minutes. 7 minutes. Okay. So we talked about it would be very nice for us to use this as an opportunity to talk to you. So we would like to invite you into a conversation about how to create spaces of repair, or what spaces do we hold in our society today. The psychiatry grew out of the church, so in that way it's somehow symbolic that we're placed in this old nunnery that was built. The building is 120 years old, and originally was like a station of care and repair. And as psychiatry grew bigger and became institutionalized, they took over a lot of these buildings. So the history in itself in the building kind of displays this development from being a place where you would care for strangers till the shape psychiatry has today, that is very biologically minded in a lot of ways. So I'm a consultant on a ward for young people suffering from psychosis and under 35, and we don't have any budget for activities, like none, which is kind of strange, I think, because this whole idea about keeping mentally fit, like it's accepted that your body degenerates if you don't use it. So everywhere we have physiotherapists, so I have like a physiotherapist on my ward, but I can't get like an activity worker or any budget for making activities. So the idea that the body degenerates if you don't use it is accepted, but the idea that your mental faculties or your mind also needs to be kept fit is not really accepted, and it's not accepted as part of the treatment. So that has been kind of like the argument for trying to make something that feels meaningful, where an art workshop in its like a small closed environment, maybe in an intimate atmosphere, can open up for renegotiation of structural roles, like, for example, doctor and patient. So Anna and I, we have been writing a text collection together that we're going to read tomorrow. That is an investigation of the doctor's and the patient's perspective in a hospital setting.
Yes, because I am a writer and a psychiatry user, and have been at your ward several times.
So this that we try to somehow create a dialogue beside the clinical language that is like the dominant language discourse in the clinical space, and it's also the clinician who writes the journal, which is also a peculiar thing, because I, as a doctor, have the right to write the truth about you in some way. And how are we to create opportunities to allow different kinds of languages to appear in this very strange room that the clinic still is, and that I think that it still should be. It should be kept as a room that is an emergency place for a lot of people.
Yes, and one of the projects that has also grown out of the Association for Arts and Mental Health is these brochures. Maybe we'll have time to read from them.
You have to read later.
Yeah, we can talk about them later, maybe.
You can present them.
I can present them. Yeah, it was an idea we got together at one of our workshops with a Danish artist called Jakob Jacobsen at Statens Museum for Kunst. And the idea was, we were talking about, as psychiatry users, how much bad advice we've been given from doctors and nurses throughout our time. And then we talked about it would be nice to give them back some advice. So me and my friend and fellow writer and also a psychiatry user, Sissel Wilden, we made these brochures on a publishing house called Amulet, which is a little activist publishing house. Yeah, and maybe we can read later from this one called 10 Pieces of Good Advice for the Doctor. Yeah. We have 2 minutes.
So the plan is to open up for discussion later. Okay, but I think I'm not going to open up a new topic right now. So the headlines here is renegotiating the hospital as a place that shows hospitality towards the strange. I can also, shortly I can present one of the other projects we have is like the hospital radio. That's also kind of a way to give voice to the incarcerated. We have like a radio studio. That's actually Jakob Jakobsen's project, Hospital Prison University Archive, that we inherited in the association. He was our deputy chair for a couple of years and started establishing the association. And the idea is that we have a radio station at our place, and then we have a satellite at the closed ward at Mental Health Care Center Amager, where psychiatry users are the hosts, and they interview different kind of people, writers,
Actors.
and a Danish stand-up comedian, actors, and stuff. So how do we kind of give voice to all the different kind of voices, all the ones who don't have access to the public stream, those who don't have access to public platforms, and those who are physically not able to get out, like the incarcerated? How can we kind of produce formats where these kind of languages can appear?
Thank you. Yeah, it works. Thanks a lot for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here. And it's maybe the first time I'm speaking like in a real situation after COVID in publicly, so it's a little bit exciting. I just quickly say, maybe Stacey, you can put the first slide. Yeah, that's just the title of the talk or title of the program, what I'm doing. Just quickly say that what I'm opening up here, or really briefly, it's a little bit, it's about access, but it's also kind of somehow intersectionally about many other things. So when we've been working through the terms of access or thinking about accessibility, it's also very much other things than maybe physical access to the space or even mental access to the context or experiencing the culture or life. So this presentation or talk is a little bit like on many things, or I mentioned many things. And then I also want to mention that or acknowledge that especially about these things what I'm speaking, I have worked last few years at Frame, as Miriam was mentioning, but also in collaboration with many other organizations and individuals and communities, which I cannot mention all of them, but I just want to say maybe few people who Jenni Julia Wallinheimo-Heimonen, who is a Finnish artist and disability activist who's been a very important collaborator for us. Also Jemina Lindholm, who is an artist and art educator. Jesse Pulivant, who is also artist. I'm kind of mentioning their work later also. And then Yvonne Billimore, who has been co-curator or curator at the Frame, who I've been working for these things. But there's also many others. We programmed or worked with maybe 80 people or organizations within three years, so it's a lot of people and kind of a lot of agents and agencies part of it. My background, let's very quickly say that I think a little bit to position myself. I studied art or to be artist, and then switched gradually to curating or programming and organizing things. And I think the basic need or basic reason for it, it's very kind of basic story or similar story to many others. I got really frustrated on how institutions or organizations would show the work or like talk about my work or whoever's work. So it's kind of switched to the kind of, so I'm kind of saying that maybe it's a basic, this artist run experience in that sense. And then at Frame, where I've worked last 3 years or a bit more, as a head of program, Frame as an organization, you were speaking about kind of healing from or kind of curing from something, and I thought like, what's the organization, or like, what's like, what we are curing from through this organization like Frame, which is quite similar than Office for Contemporary Art Norway, UK, as an organization, so like state-funded, like national, and somehow try to represent, we were talking earlier also, like try to represent the country and its contemporary art scene, so it's really different, like it's art organization in many ways. But then I'm thinking about just, this is my reading of the organization's history also, where it's tried to cure from, or what it's like healing from. Basically it started in 90s, and out of, in a way, access to international art scene from Finland. So international art scene or access to there would have been then before that quite a lot like between this Eastern and Western bloc of Europe or world, like this Cold War rhetorics in a way, Cold War world. And then through this 90s wave of globalization, we needed to cure from nationalism or certain kind of way of thinking about country or its position. So I think there's like one layer of access already there, this access to international art scene or access to kind of international discussion in a way. And then, but of course that created the whole other problems or throughout, like how to after like in 30 years, which have been somehow maybe or which we've been trying to maybe like open up or through the programming in some ways. So as a Frame, it does many things, but like the main mandate is to facilitate international or transnational, which may be the better word for it now, connections from Finnish art scene to other art scenes by doing millions of different things. But maybe the core of it, when we started to read for it, was to understand that the hospitality or hosting and being guest and host is kind of core of it. Maybe Slesi taking now. Oh yes. Oh no, one back. Two back. This one. Yes. So it was already there. Thanks. So maybe here you can see like a basic information of the, just by looking at the screen capture of the website. But the hospitality was there in a kind of core of the lot of things, like what we do, organizing, making connections between people and organizations, like submitting knowledge between them, like giving them opportunities to meet and like exchange, practically organizing trips and other kind of way of networking, and then facilitating experiences of Finnish art scene or artist work and other things. And in all of these things, kind of very practically hospitality played a part in it. And then we wanted to kind of look through that what other things can be done than to just this like a kind of, which I call in a way neoliberal or productive networks as such, which are just to made in a way some kind of quantitative way of measuring what organization does or how international art scene, how many connections there are, and what other things or cultural and ideological possibilities this act of hospitality can have in this kind of organization. And maybe to kind of continue from that, we try to understand how kind of a different critical questions the arts institution, or it can, through this programming, we can ask from the art institution itself, arts in more broadly, and different professionals and individuals in it working on it. And then maybe the central question became then very much, which we now we're trying to work through 3 years. How can we learn and unlearn with other collaborators and through collaborating with other organizations and individuals? So that was somehow this kind of a change of how programming and thinking of the institution was done, or attempt to change it. Okay, I have to speed up. Yeah, you can switch, Stacey, the slide now. Yeah, so this is the what I kind of what we realized, that there need to be a very different kind of forms of programming, experiencing, and kind of producing knowledge. And you can see some kind of ways of it we've been doing. Yeah, different things like publications, different forms of programming, exhibitions, performances, and podcasts, and tons of different things. And then, which is somehow, I just bring up like 3 things, and then maybe 3 things, and then I'm trying to speak about quickly about how to kind of respond them, or how to have some kind of ideas how to respond on this, in a way, concerns or questions or urgencies or problems. So as this first one, or the different forms of knowing and programming and experiencing somehow hints. Please, you can change the slide now. So there are some texts which are, maybe you can have a time to read them or not. It's from quotations from the book which we've been publishing. I can give it to later you to kind of look through. So in the first 2019, we were trying to understand, or like there are diversity of different situated knowledges, bodily ways of knowing and producing knowledge, non-Western epistemologies, like healing, different ways of knowing, and then we were trying to kind of understand how this affect on how we are programming, or how we're working with other people, how with other organizations, how we are inviting people, what's the on performing or practicing these things in the program and outside of it, how it supports them in more long-term ways of also. And then this was 2019, and then 2018, 20, we realized that it's not kind of enough to speak about how we just about diversity of experiences or knowledges or kind of a situated knowledges. It's also important to understand like who has the access and how to these knowledges or situations where the knowledge is produced within the art scene. You can switch the slide again. So we started to trying to understand in very different ways of things which Eve mentioned in the earlier and what has been discussed already here, quite a lot of like very practical questions of accessibility. We have kind of worked with the different artists and activists to understand like what we need to do with our programming, like how different kind of bodies can attend it, but also I would say, which has been the kind of problem of this kind of I call it like assimilative logic, is that we need to also understand that it's not only about like trying to invite people into your space or into master's house or somehow, but also try to kind of support them outside of it. And what does it mean? you don't kind of expect the people to enter the institution to get the support or access needs served, but what can we do outside of it? That has been also the kind of crucial question, I think, which I don't know have been in order to kind of like somehow have any answers to it, but somehow it's been stressing me. And then to kind of say that it's yeah, so in order to kind of the idea of the programming has been to also looking back also critically all the time what we've been doing, and not to drop some kind of thematics or bringing kind of turning things into topics, but somehow trying to learn different practices, how to do things, which I don't have time to really much go on here, but maybe hopefully in the conversation or tomorrow. But not, maybe you can switch the slide now. We can, it's a way to me to get forward. So looking back to this question of different knowledges and experience and kind of access, we understood that there's also a question of safety and security, what needs to be discussed. And one of the like many of these art institutions or art contexts, when we speak about safety and security, specifically security, we are kind of thinking about infrastructures or even objects of the art or properties. And then like how to switch this kind of your focus from those in a way to communities who you were working with. And that has been, I think, the challenge all the time for bigger institutions, but also like smaller ones, which are very, very much interested about this easily like this bureaucratic idea of security or safety, that we cross certain boxes and then everything is fine, but also it's not about like always, it's really hard to like have this very individual and specific needs and interest for safety or security, even in a way visible in the space what we are working in. And maybe cut to end, I have a lot of things, other things here which I don't have time to say, but maybe to say that like all of these things are now currently somehow in the stage that, or actually in our programming in the stage that I'm looking more and more into this question of not only about making people or institution or art scene inclusive or accessible in that way, but also thinking about like the power of the institutions or redistribution of their resources and kind of bringing the question of class and intersectional approach in that sense there too. And I think that that's the most, feels like a most hardest point or hardest leap to take. Maybe in the kind of a small, more like a grassroots scene or activist scene, or this small where there's no so much resources anyway, we are more kind of used to share them or kind of create or work through them as a commons or commons resources, but in the kind of a bigger institutional scene where they have to compete about different fundings and different things all the time, it feels so much really hard on thinking about that. Okay, how do we let go of this certain funding or resources in order to serve someone else better? I think that's the most hardest thing to kind of handle now. I don't have anything else now. Thank you.
Thank you, all three. And we're opening up the floor to questions or conversation. So maybe I'll just ask first, is there anyone in the audience? Would you like to, do you have questions for Jussi or Birgit or Anna?
I have one eager to raise my hand here. And thanks for a really fascinating discussion. And also I think it's I guess it raises a lot of extra questions to have your two kinds of institutions side by side, and I think these are maybe part of the problems that you were struggling with, you see, that you mentioned here at the very end. But I think this is also a tension that we grapple with at UKS on behalf of all our members who are artists, who also want us to be a successful art institution. But there are these two ways of looking at art that also becomes apparent here. That from the Association for Art and Mental Health, there's very much in your presentation this art as human self-expression in a way. That's also in the core UKS principles. That's very much how art is described, as something that's common and shared and expressive among all of us, and that we as an organization should work at sort of promoting access to. But then on the other hand, there's the more professional setting as artists, where art is maybe more looked at as a profession, and as where the artist is more a producer of artworks that circulate in these professional institutional settings, and which I guess was in setting up something like Frame, I think, to sort of promote the increased circulation of those artworks were like part of the design, and it is part of the design of any exhibition space or art institution. But I think what you were getting at in the end, you see, is like a tension between these two things. That what is good for the artworks is maybe sometimes not so good for the artists themselves, or what can create more space for artists or artworks to circulate faster and broader and further and more expensively is not so, maybe doesn't make for an accommodating institution for humans. So this is like maybe a long way to state that I share these concerns, but maybe also ask maybe how can an institution, especially like Frame, sort of make this space for people, for artists, being artists, and not simply a profession, and then maybe also to the Association for Art and Mental Health, that how can sort of an audience, or how can the public get an access to the expression? Like, if art is a form of self-expression, then it's also like an expression towards others. You want, even though you maybe would want it in a smaller setting, if you're enduring a crisis, you would maybe want others to be able to see what you do. That's part of being expressive, I guess.
I think one important question is the concept of the artist, that traditionally in the fine arts has been seen as the over-capable human being. Because the Association of Arts and Mental Health, we don't just do things in our place, we also go out into other institutions and discuss this theme. And there's a discussion in Denmark in the art schools right now about mental illness or vulnerabilities, and how to produce better frames for the students, but also amongst teachers. Like, there's also a culture that is very elitist, and I think it stems from an idea, a romanticist idea about the artist as the unique individual pointed out by the divine force, and a lot of the artistic institutions are sculptured around this idea of the artist as someone who's super capable. So we went to the Rhythmic Music Conservatory. We were invited to a talk with a student there who also was a psychiatry user, and Anna, who kind of talked about their experiences about being students at art academies in Denmark, and it it became clear that the institution itself is built for neuronormal people with so-called normal nervous systems, and she had to like perform 20 hours of confrontation a week, where she had to be present. All the rooms, the architecture of the rooms were excluding people who are hypersensitive towards sound, which was one of her forces, that she had this extraordinary sensibility towards sounds and sculpting music. So the whole institution was excluding her with her nervous system, but still the artwork that she produced came out of this sensibility that might be, you know, the flip coin, the flip side of being having an artistic talent, that you also have an extraordinary way of being in the world. You have super sensitive perceptions that you can transform into artworks. So this whole idea of the superhuman artist, I think it's just outdated. And I think it's important to have that conversation also, that it still runs very deep within the art world, that the artist is someone who's like above and hyper productive in some way, and I don't think that mirrors reality. Yeah, so my point, and thank you very much for your lovely talk and your very important work, because like one thing is like the physical accessibility, but that the art world is also mentally very inaccessible, and with very competitive environment and very high ideals, and also some stereotypes floating that makes it very unhealthy, I think, in a lot of ways, because there are a lot of malignant projections about how you should be to be the right kind of artist, to be inside the institutions. And because it is so competitive, a lot of my very talented patients, they are just not capable of applying into art schools, because they maybe need reduced time or other options for like 20 hours a week confrontation. But maybe you could tell a little about how you experienced going to the Writers' Academy.
Yeah. Well, that was, I think, what we found out when we talked to Anna Veum, the Danish musician who went to Rytmisk Musikkonservatorium, was that Forfatterskolen, the Danish Creative Writing Academy, is a quite small school. So there was we could have different initiatives. For instance, the school secretary, she offered to pick me up by bike every day at my home, even though she lived like 10 minutes away on a bike. I had a little bed for my dog at the school, so I could bring my dog because it made me feel safe. I had a mattress, so I could lie down if I became tired. But I was not allowed to have I asked to get sick leave. What's it called when you, for half a year, and that was not permitted. So, but I think, because it's such a small school, it was
better for you than for Anna.
Yeah.
But what Anna was very clear, the other Anna was very clear about, that she has this resistance towards being reduced to a diagnosis, because to have different circumstances than the usual student, you have to kind of have a diagnosis, and you have to kind of apply for
she called it referred to it as she was doing a double work. She was doing the
because she had to like apply for extraordinary conditions all the time, so that she kind of resisted that it's not me that's something wrong with, it's the institution. It was very
my mother always says that you have to be very well to be sick, because you have to do a lot of work in order to be able to have a sick leave, get money if you can't work, you have to be
fill
very,
out
and
forms.
also know how to talk to doctors when you're in a consultation. You know, you have to know how to, what's going on inside your head or around you in order to get any help. I mean, it takes a lot of work. It's a full-time job being mentally ill.
Yeah, maybe what I feel like that the, in a way, curators or institution role in our programming and maybe in more generally too, and many times feel like that it's trying to kind of create this safe or protective bubble for certain demands or this extractive logic what the certain institutional or funding bodies or funding structures have, and as a frame, because we are also funding body, or like somehow on the other hand setting these structures and then try to work through different things or do different things within them. It's a little bit paranoid sometimes, and somehow really yeah, you are like mixed with these different things and ideas. What we've been maybe trying to like more concretely do within the programming, that we have been trying to keep like more long-term relationship with the different artists who we work with. So it's not only about always like as much as the resources and time and money can somehow allow. It's not only about showing the one work or like somehow force them or invite them to do one specific things, but it's more like a kind of invitations to find like a new ways of maybe creating or maybe doing the work in the program what we do. So as much as possible we try to avoid this like really strict invitations that can we show your work or really specific form of it, but it's more like, okay, this is the context, do you want to work with us in certain way, maybe here is some resources what we can offer, what comes from it, and then next year or within the next future we have been also inviting people to then, or like somehow giving them possibility to do other things, not only about showing their own work, maybe curate something, maybe do a podcast, maybe edit something, maybe write something. So it's not only about like somehow fostering a very specific form of being artist, but somehow trying to understand that there is a variety of expressions within or qualities and needs within one person or one artist. So that is something I think which is very important to remember when you work as an institution, and then it almost like a protecting these like people who you work with from the demands what maybe the ministry as a funding body has for us in a way.
Questions? Are there any questions on the internet? No. That's a first, yeah, but also no trolls, so that's good, I think.
But I think there are different levels in this. So one thing is like the structural political decisions made about where to send the money, lack of funding, but also a culture that's very old and structural archetypes that keep on reproducing. So how do we change these passes? How do we initiate good talks about these concepts that we all more or less unconsciously reproduce, because they're still very much alive in the art institutions, like their whole educational programs demand like a very capable body who is able to produce and like hyper-produce, and also throw yourself you also have to be your own entrepreneur afterwards. You have to be your own business, like you have to sell yourself, go to art fairs, and all these things that you're not really educated very well in.
And you have to do it all without really being paid for any of the work that you do.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So there's a lot of sickness in the culture also around the art world where people also work for free or offered like a bottle of wine to come and sell their work, which is like an insult. Like one very good example is when we got our funding, and we got very generous funding after 3 years where we've all been working voluntarily. And the comment I had from the fund before we got the money is why the salary for the artists was so high, because they scaled them in as activity workers in psychiatry, so they should have the same as like a non-educated person doing activities in for mentally ill people. And I had to argue really aggressively that the artists that we hired in, that they were experts, so they should have a salary that was according to a consultant, because the expertise they had would take a lot of time to build up. A lot of them have 20, 30 years of experience, and you can't just pay them as someone who doesn't have an education, but just shows that this whole value system in society also doesn't recognize the expertise that the artist has, that is important for all of us, because art is a special kind of knowledge that cannot be reduced to understanding or explaining. It's something that's in between, that has this synthesizing effect between body and mind, and that can open up a very special kind of place and conversation between human beings. And that's, I think, it's for all of us, but like, of course, especially for people in mental crisis, has become very important, because the desynchronization that can take place between body and mind, that can be the reason for you ending up in psychiatry, is still very important also for society. So I think it's also very important for artists to engage in these conversations, that why it is important that we still have artists, that it's not just like a capitalist system of who sells the most and who is mostly represented at the art fairs, but that the artist as a figure has a very important role to play that might be different than the idea of the artist in the classical age or the romanticist age. And I think these discussions, they lack, or that we think it also has to come from within the art world, that you kind of make it clear why it is so important that we still have art. This summer I went to the southern of France to see the Lascaux caves with the cave paintings that are like 20,000 years old. And it's just very mysterious why they're there, because it was at a time where it was assumed that human beings would live from hand to mouth, barely surviving. But we have this idea that art is something that is on top of the pyramid. So when all other needs are covered, when you have food, when you have shelter, when you can reproduce yourself, then you can do, as a surplus, you can do the arts. But these paintings somehow show us that people have had the need to express themselves. It played an important function, symbolizing their lives, or initiating dialogue with the environment through these representations that were very difficult to make at that time. So this whole idea is, why do we need art? Do we need it at all? Why don't you just go out and find some productive work and do some good instead? So these basic conversations about why art is important, I think, should also be taken within the art society.
Thank you to all three of you. Our time is up. But so we're going to have a 10-minute break, and then we're gonna do a writing workshop facilitated by Anna and Birgit. And for those of you watching from home, this is the end of the live stream for today. The workshop will not be live streamed, so it's just for those of us who are in the room. But we'll see you on the live stream again tomorrow at 11. And thank you all three. And Jussi, we'll hear much more from you tomorrow when we're also going to be chatting.
Thank you.
Thank you.